So thank you all for coming tonight. It's the biggest crowd we've ever gotten. Yay. So some exciting things going on for Peace Exchange. This is going to be our second in-person event ever. And then we have coming up, we're doing Seeing Through the Subterfuge on International Conflict Resolution on April 5th at 11 a.m. That's going to be on Zoom. And you can find all that information on our Instagram. It's Peace Exchange at CU Denver on Instagram. And then it's also the University Calendar. So with that, tonight, Mark Windsor is going to be speaking on negotiating international security. So Mark Windsor, he's a lecturer here at CU Denver in the Department of Political Science. He's interested in studies international security and conflict resolution strategies. Prior to coming to the university, Mark worked as the assistant to the director of regional security at Search for Common Ground in Jerusalem, and served as the interim director of the NGO Committee on Disarmament at the United Nations headquarters in New York.
All right, good evening, everybody. Nice to see all of you faces. This is our first event. So Peace Exchange does two types of events. We do events for those interested in careers in international politics, really it's a cross-section, not just international politics in general, but any kind of peace building, peace activity. So we have kind of career conferences on that. And we also, this will be the first one where we're doing kind of a practitioner, kind of insights from a practitioner. We'll do those every couple of weeks, okay? Or no, sorry, once a month. It should be once a month. Okay, so today we're talking about negotiating international politics. Since we don't have a whiteboard or a screen, I just printed up my notes to help you guys follow along. So I'm just going to pass that out. You guys can pass it around. Hopefully we have any copies. Okay, so international negotiations, or excuse me, negotiating security or security negotiations are quite different from negotiations on trade, personal negotiation, personal bargaining. So it's something we call positional bargaining. Right? So that's sorry. So it's different from positional bargaining, where you don't really give away what you want, and everybody has an idea of what the middle ground is. But international security is completely transparent, not completely, but it's much more transparent. So although the stakes are really high, the players can actually see what's happening without even sitting down at the table. Right? They're actually negotiating by moving pieces around. It also employs a whole set of different formal and informal tools. So like I was saying, that I looked at a couple of examples. So biological weapons in 1970, at least 1972, Richard Nixon just unilaterally pulled out of just unilaterally said, we're going to stop biological program. So he just said, no, we're done. We're going to stop building biological weapons. We're going to just dismantle all of ours. And is a negotiation strategy. That was to send it's basically a signal. So it was signaling to the Russians that, these are really expensive programs. We don't really intend to use them. So let's dismantle it. And the Russians, in political terms, almost instantly agree. Another thing is arms races. Another way that you can see negotiations happening on the international stage is if you want to if you want to get the country to back down, you can try not to spend them. And then they'll, this usually happens in the polls. And then the country say, okay, let's get rid of this. Right? And that's actually what you want to do. So that's how it differs. As I point out here, the risk of failing does come at a much higher cost than most other negotiations. It's one thing to lose a trade deal, it's another thing to or just, it doesn't even need to be that bad. It's just that a war begins or something. Right? Okay, so what I want to do is I want to give you guys a set of tools that I've kind of listed here. I want to go through these tools, and then we're going to think about the conflict in Ukraine. Let's try and match it up. We'll also have a stop engaging in little exercise. I don't know how much you guys know about what's going on, but it really doesn't matter just from your knowledge of the news. We'll engage in a little exercise, and then we can walk through where this might head. So the first thing we want to know, and you have to understand, I'm looking at this from a mediator's perspective, right? So somebody who stands in the middle of two parties. So I'm thinking about what I want to know as a mediator. I want to know what the parties' positions are. The parties' positions are their perception of the conflict. Okay, it's how they see it. Mostly, this is uninteresting to me. Okay, because it's they're wrong, I'm right. Right? So it's pretty much I can guess that. But I do want to know it, but I want to move on, and I want to know what's your interest. What are the parties actually trying to achieve? What do they hope to achieve? Why do they feel they need to change to achieve whatever objective? And that comes to our next bullet point there, which is needs, right? What I really want to know is what do you really need? What do you need before either this escalates, if it's not satisfying, or if I can satisfy it to start a conflict resolution process. And then related to that is your background, your best alternative to a negotiated agreement. So when does the party just walk away? Just walks away from the table, says, you know what, I'm not achieving what I want through talks or through, and when I say talks, okay, recalling the Ukrainian situation, just the amassing of troops in Belarus and Russia around Ukraine, that's talking. Okay. If you're, and in this case, you would argue, or could be argued, that Putin exercised his background, right? He wasn't getting what he wanted, so invasion. So that's a background. It's really important for mediators to know what backgrounds are, so you can steer the parties away from it and try and keep them at the table. Another relevant area here is game theory, particularly in security situations. Game theory is just kind of going back and looking at the Ukrainian situation. Right, again, we can see the first stage of game theory was satisfied with what I just said, positioning of troops. That's a game of chess, right? And from there, it's played out strategically in a way that you're trying to outmaneuver your opponent, just like the game of chess. The next relevant thing here, as I said, when negotiating international security, it's more transparent. You know more, you can see more of what the parties are doing. And so it's, often the game of poker is invoked in negotiations. And I tweak that here and I said, no, you know what, it's really like Texas Hold'em. Because the difference with Texas Hold'em is you see the cards in the river, right? So you see part of it, right? And you're still strategically holding your two cards, which the other player doesn't. Okay? And you may be bluffing, or you may have something that the other player doesn't. And then the third game is chicken. I relate it to chicken in the sense that, and I put this as the last game, but it could also be the first game. When we're running head to head, and the other guy doesn't score, and you end up in a conflict. But also, I see it very relevant at the end of in kind of conflict resolution or the movement towards conflict resolution, in that it's important that the players save face. Right? If they are humiliated, conflict is likely to arise. Right? And some of my former students are very familiar with these next tools. These are the tools that every country has. Dialogue, diplomacy, intelligence, military, and economic. And those are the tools that are exercised not only every day, but not only in a security situation or in a war, but also in everyday politics. These are the tools states have. And we'll talk about that. That's actually where our exercise will come in. Then I just want to make relevant here that it's I don't want to call it the game. The game is played by more than just the parties to conflicts, right? So we have these different tracks called track diplomacy. Track one is just the parties directly negotiating between each other. Right? It's just head to head. Track two is, like I said earlier, is what mediators do. So mediator steps in between the two parties and it helps them to see, and often this is really important, it helps them to see what their interests and needs are. Because so often the parties to the conflict don't see it, they're blinded by the problem. So a mediator tries to help them to see that and to move them towards resolution. Track three diplomacy is generally referred to as when groups of individuals between, let's say it's just two parties. So groups of individuals, whether it be business leaders, whether it be interest groups, whether it be mothers, it doesn't really matter, begin to cooperate outside the realm of the state. Right? So I think I wrote here, so an interesting example of this would be, and I don't know if any of you have heard about this, the Ukrainian set up an NGO for Russian mothers and sisters, whatever, to try to find out where their brothers and husbands are. Okay? And so the Ukrainians are cooperating with the Russians, right? And this is all under the radar. That's track three diplomacy. Track four diplomacy, grassroots. Right? That's the protesters on the street, particularly in this case, Russia. The only ones that would really have it, that would even, have an effect. Protesters in Ukraine are not going to affect it. Protests in the West are not going to affect it. But protests at home. Okay, so those are the tracks of diplomacy. Let's look at some different kind of strategies. So, preventive diplomacy. Actions taken in advance of a predictable crisis, either to eliminate the threat or to reduce violence. This could be just approaching the parties, or I just noticed this on that. Originally or historically, the thought there was to avoid superpower conflict. So you would take a bunch of actions to ensure that the superpowers don't get dragged into this is during the Cold War. Don't get dragged into a war in Mozambique, for example. So you want to take actions before, and it's just a wide menu of going back to your dying tools, diplomacy, intelligence, military, and economic, just a wide variety of tools, from economic sanctions to, I don't know what I put here, offering better conditions. It could also be threats. It could be shuttle diplomacy. Shuttle diplomacy is something we were witnessing in the last week. Shuttle diplomacy is when you're seeing like Anthony Lincoln, you know, teach going back to Europe or going to different countries. We've seen it with the Ukrainians, and we've seen it with the Russians, and we've seen it with us. So that's shuttle diplomacy. Okay, so it's just this menu of errors and mistakes that can be employed to try to prevent the conflict in the first place. Coercive diplomacy, forceful persuasion. So it's an attempt to get the target state or group or groups within the state to change their objectionable behavior through either the threat of force or the actual use of limited force. And when I say force here, economic sanctions would fall into that category. Okay? But it's the threat of actually doing it. And if it escalates, actually doing it in a limited way. This has probably been our approach to Russia for the last 10 years, at least. Okay. Conflict, these are kind of conflict has broken out. So peace enforcement. This is it's a United Nations action to be done legally. It would be done by the United Nations, what we call a Chapter 7 action. So it's when the Security Council has voted to take action, and you're doing it without the permission of the parties. You're just going to go in and you're going to separate the parties, and you're going to try and create conditions conducive to starting talks or at the very least just end the violence. So yeah, forced separation of party, forced, and it could include forced demobilization, disarmament. So demobilization is to take the soldiers out of their units, okay, try to reintegrate them in society and take away their weapons. And coming from the disarmament community, it's always important to me to remind everybody that we should also destroy these weapons, right? Because if you don't destroy them, they just end up in battle again. Peacekeeping. A lot like peace enforcement. Well, usually there's been some, because we don't like to send peacekeepers into violent areas. It's really not their job to bring them into the conflict. It's their job to end. It's their job to separate the parties, to keep them separated, and to monitor their activities. They may sometimes work towards a brokered solution, but that's usually left to the diplomats, not the peacekeepers. But it provides that space for diplomats to come in and begin talks. They also importantly provide security assurances, because without security assurances, parties would be very reluctant, right, to give up their arms. So they provide security assurances. Okay, so significant military deployment to establish and maintain order with the party's permission. I want to point a note here. So peace enforcement, in the case of Korea, it could be a situation that we may be getting ourselves into, where the parties are sorry, not the parties, the superpowers are deadlocked. Any move to place peacekeepers or take a peace enforcement action at the United Nations in the Security Council will immediately be vetoed by Russia. That is the situation that happened in Korea, and the General Assembly found a way around that. And it's called Chapter 6.5 activity. These are just part, when I say chapters, they're just sections of the charter. Okay. And so this is, and so, yeah, they deal with different parts. But because the United Nations, because the United Nations Charter never fully spells out exactly what peacekeeping activities are. They talk about peace enforcement in chapter 7, but they don't talk about peacekeeping. And so the General Assembly used that basically loophole to engage in Korea. It's called this chapter 6.5. Okay. The latter stages. So now let's flip the page, and now we're looking at moving towards resolution. Peacemaking. Peacemaking are efforts to end violence between conflicting parties and move them towards nonviolent dialogue, eventually to reach some sort of peace agreement, some kind of peace accord. It's the use of government goods offices. So this is, peacemaking usually happens in the latter stages where the parties are, it could just be attrition, it could just, just burned out. That could be. But it's when either member state governments or the UN itself comes in and provides resources and tries to coax the partners towards, or the parties towards peace. These should be, as I point out here, they should be designed to address the cause. They shouldn't just be willy-nilly. These are the things that are going to get the parties to just stop violence. We want to go beyond that, and we want to actually start addressing the cause of the conflict in the first place. And then peace building. Peace building takes place after calm has been restored, and it's about not only restoring the institutions of the state, but also restoring society, healing society. There is a lot to deal with in a post-conflict situation. There's, when we talk about conflicts in Africa, for example, we often talk about child soldiers, right? How do we deal with them? How do we demobilize, get them out of their units? Getting those type of soldiers out of their units is particularly hard because in most cases it's all they know. Okay, they were recruited at a young age. Their gun is their, there's a movie line for that. I forget. This is my gun. This is it. But they're very reluctant to give up their gun. Very reluctant to leave their units. So all those kind of things have to be addressed in the peace building stage and beyond. So again, trauma healing. Reintegration is a big part of that. So how are you going to get these soldiers back into society, and society also accepting them? Everybody's been badly affected by this. So yeah, that's peace building. Okay, types of resolution. So we have conflict settlements. Settlements just the end of violence. It hasn't been resolved yet. It's just the end of violence. Conflict management. This is peacekeeping, and it's the things that happen during the peacekeeping stage. As I said, peacekeepers are monitors, right? They separate the parties, they sit between parties, and they also watch their activities. So this is where more management of the between the parties can happen, and you can start to engage with them. I mean, the violence has been settled, and so you can start to engage with them, start to find out what are their positions, interests, and needs, and try to move forward. Conflict transformation is what I just talked about. Peace building. It's just changing the relationships between the parties. Healing the relationship between the parties. Yeah. And then conflict resolution. Conflict resolution is when the deep-rooted sources of the conflict have been addressed. Unfortunately, that's rare that we get to full conflict resolution. That's very resolved. Most conflicts tend to simmer. and they'll reemerge their ugly heads someday. Okay. I talked about that earlier, it's fine. I'm just going to go through the roles of the mediator again before we start to look at actually this conflict. So again, the position, like I said, how do they perceive the conflict, and then try to move beyond that to get to their interests and needs, as I said. Their interest is what do they want and why, and then their needs, kind of what is the red line. The interests and needs, no matter how perverse they may sound to the mediator, the mediating body, they need to be taken seriously. Okay? You can't just dismiss it and say you're crazy. You can't just say, well, Mr. Putin, there's no way we're going to remove our forces from. You have to take it seriously and understand it and react on that basis. That doesn't mean you have to agree with it. You just need to take it seriously. And we talked about that. So the task is to separate the people from the problem. That's often not an easy thing to do, but you got to get them kind of out of their mindset that I'm right or wrong. You know, our position is correct, and just I always liken it to just taking out the map and going, look, guys, stop thinking about how angry you are, what happened, or why you want revenge. What is it you're actually trying to get? Let's just look at the map in material terms and talk about that. Let's focus the conversation. Then, like I said earlier, define the party's badness. That's really important to know when they're going to walk away. Eradicate or satisfy spoilers. Spoilers are a big problem. So spoilers are generally, well, their spoilers are peoples or groups usually of people who either aren't getting as much or what they want out of negotiations, or they weren't invited there in the first place. And not getting invited there in the first place usually results in violence as they try to either disrupt the negotiation process, the peace process, or try to bargain their way for a seat. So you have to deal with spoilers. And then often, it depends on what the conflict is, but you want to enlarge the body, right? So party A is saying, well, I demand this particular territory of land. Party B is, no, you can't have that. Then what I would want to do is want to know why party A is so adamant about having that posted plan, right? And then try to say, okay, well, you feel you need this for security purposes. Well, maybe I can provide you security assurances, or maybe just thinking outside the box to try to find some other way. Why now? I usually do in my courses I kind of wish maybe I should have used the dialectic, but it's like you guys know what a dialectic is, but you not know what it's just an intertwining to think of it as just streams, and in this particular case it's ideas and reality. And they stream through history and they interconnect at points, they reach synthesis, and then they spread apart again, and then they come together again. So you can imagine this kind of like a DNA strand. Okay? In modern history, security apparatus, there has been 3 of these inflection points. Yes. The first one was the Concert of Europe. The Concert of Europe was a managed balance of power. It was purposeful. The diplomats paid attention, and when things started to get a little hairy or scary, or whatever, people started to get upset, they would get together. They would forcefully manage it, right? They would, they understood the consequences of not managing it, which would be all out war in Europe again, right? That's kind of avoid. The next inflection in that historical stream of ideas and reality is the League of Nations. So the League of Nations is obviously a response to World War I, where everything got thrown out of whack. You also have to credit constant Europe for lasting as long as it did, 100 years. So this was an attempt to realign ideational conceptions of what the world is, what matters, with reality, and avoid, obviously, world war. And unfortunately, it was a complete failure. There was actually a guy who writes a book before World War II breaks out. He says World War II is going to happen because you guys are too idealistic. He calls them, it's probably but anyways, you guys are just way, they're utopians. Sorry, you're way too utopian. That's not how the world is constructed. You're trying to skip a step, right? And you just essentially can't do it. So yes, this E.H. Carr writes this book and say, look, you're putting these punishments on Germany and not recognizing that Germany is actually by far the most powerful industrial power in the world, and you're going to try and hold it down. That's not going to work. You're trying to make all these rules. One of the rules is the Kellogg-Graham Pact. The Kellogg-Graham Pact makes war illegal between states. It's too idealist, right? It's going to fall, and it did. And we ended up with the UN system, and we've been living on borrowed time from the UN system since arguably since 1990. Not to say that the UN should be torn down or anything like that. It just needs to be rejiggered. It's a system designed for the world and worked really well. Okay, the Cold War, it may be that, but the Cold War is no longer. Okay. So why not? Yes, the decline of this liberal international order that we have built. That when I say we, the world has built. At least since the League of Nations. You can argue or maybe back further. So it's a rules-based system where law and norms, those are the rules. That's how you. And one of the key rules here with regards to this particular conflict is territorial integrity. Right? That's a cornerstone of the system. And obviously, Putin is challenging that. Yeah, it's also the decline of democracy. I'm sure most of you are aware of that. The number of democratic governments is actually declining, not increasing. For a long time, it was increasing, and now the numbers are actually going down. So the rise of authoritarianism. From a state perspective, failure to forcibly respond to violations of international law. This is I would say, NATO's or the West's fault. So these norms and laws that we uphold as the cornerstone and the bedrock of this system, we haven't been willing to enforce them. And of course, we are not willing to enforce them because we have nuclear powers to deal with. But we can talk about that when we have an open discussion. But, so to boot, obviously the West looks broken, right? It's fractured, especially going, just coming out of the Trump administration, where Trump was intensely trying to dismantle this institution, and some of the European powers do not. They're, really the larger European powers were okay with that. And of course, Estonia and Latvia are going to argue strongly against that. But yeah, so it's been visible, right? And again, this is what I mean about international security negotiations being out in the open, right? They're just there. You just need to understand what everybody's saying, right? They're telling you this. So Putin has been telling us about NATO expansionism since, well, he was elected in 2008, right? So he's been talking about this forever. We either dismissed it as, well, that's just rhetoric. Sometimes we address it as a serious concern. But then you have incidents like Georgia, South Ossetia, or Chechnya, or Crimea, or just, it's cumulative, right? It keeps testing the waters and we don't do anything about it. So Ukraine is the next logical step. And then if he decides further west, the logical step. So he's testing our resolve. Now, he would like to, I would also say this is in conjunction with China, right? So China's testing our resolve too, right? With the South China Sea, right? Territorial integrity. They keep threatening Taiwan, right? Is the same kind of threats. And they're both testing our resolve. And I really think at the outbreak of this, neither one of them seriously considered. So, Putin's, the nuclear bomb of all economic sanctions, which is the SWIFT system, which is to pull you, it's just all your money's locked, and you can't do anything with it. That's what's happening to the ruble right now. They've had to shut down the stock market. They can't do anything because you're taking out that system because you can't transfer rubles to any other country. So they're essentially worthless. So that was all political, right? But we're still dancing this game. There's a saying. What we're doing right now is we are walking through the raindrop. We're walking between the raindrops, trying not to get wet. Eventually, we're going to get wet. It's just one. Well, that's not exactly, not totally true. That's what we're trying to do. There are options. There are ways out. Okay. So here, I wanted to conduct this exercise and just kind of get a sense of, what do you guys know, and what do you think? Before I do that, I want to go through the first half of this box on the front page. Let's just go through the first half before we get to the problem of de-escalation, because we're not there yet. So this is kind of repeating what you just said, right? Grievance formation, right? Putin has been telling us he has grievances. I think Russia's been telling us they have grievances since 1990. What do you guys think those grievances are? NATO members, well, what if you have, so NATO membership for Ukraine or something else? Encroachment towards it. Yeah, major encroachment, right? So we're really what, well, I'll let this answer later, what wants, but it is encroachment, right? Some 30, is that right? Or, I somewhere around 10. About 30% Russia has its, NATO has about 10. What would that be? 10? So it's like 30% expansion. That's a serious matter, right? And we shouldn't have just ignored it, because that's essentially what we did. We just set out as nonsense. Don't worry about it. But no, for Russia, that's a very serious matter. for us, the reason why we kind of are like, well, you don't need to worry about it, because I don't think we have ever had any intention of invading Russia, nor do we now, right? But they don't know that, right? They don't know that. We know that, so we just kind of dismiss it. But they don't know that. They don't understand that. If we had more dialogue, we had a lot of dialogue. We really need more for them to come to trust us. But we also humiliated them, right? Directly after the war, humiliation is a very powerful instrument for mobilizing the war. It was just a humiliation. We didn't give them the respect that they deserved, that they felt that they deserved. We kind of went na 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 na, you know, we won. For at least the first half a decade or so. There was all the countries of Eastern Europe were having these democratic revolutions. Okay. He's also, Russians have also highlighted our reneging on agreements, going back on agreements. So we've had several agreements. I'm not going to go through them, but nuclear agreements, agreements on nuclear weapons, agreements on force posture, agreements on all kinds of on Ukraine itself, and we kind of reneged on this. We just didn't follow through. I wouldn't say that we totally reneged. We just didn't follow through the way that Russia pushed. And that's the excuse. That gives you the pretext for invasion. As I mentioned earlier, we didn't pay attention when he set the stage, right? That's actually the only time we really started to pay attention, right? When we really started seeing those masses of forces, right? Not, we're talking 100,000, 150,000 forces. The signal that, and this is, you can tell, this is when NATO, the European powers, kind of, oh, maybe we should really be paying attention, was transferring blood to the front line. Blood and medical supplies. Well, yeah. And he may still be saying, no, these are just exercises. No, that's a clear signal. So again, this is negotiation, this is the talking. Our reaction was preventive diplomacy. We tried to allay Putin of Russia's fears. In reality, it was just too little, too late. We were late to the party. Interestingly, Putin, although there is less respect for the liberal international order among China and Russia, it's not that they're going to totally dismiss it. And so, interestingly, they set up a pretext for war by recognizing these two states, the Luhansk and Donbass, right? Recognizing their independence, and immediately after that, the legislator in Russia, the Duma, passed legislation authorizing military force, what Putin called peacekeeping, and this morning, what Colbert said, Stephen Colbert called it, it's peacekeeping. We cut them in pieces and we keep this, so it's just keeping parts. So, but he set up the legal context of he said, no, I'm actually acting legitimate, right? And that'll become important when we, hopefully within a month or two, when we're in the de-escalation stage. Okay, then he exercised his backup. Right? He just straight up exercised his backup. If you guys won't sign an agreement demilitarizing the Ukraine and allowing our troops to provide security and promising never to enter NATO and removing NATO from those other however many countries, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, and all these countries that have seen right? If you don't go back to 1990, well then, that he exercised and he invaded. And since then, he has controlled access to the internet, so has access to information, the freedom of speech. He's provided false narratives. So, you know, one of the things I'm worried about right now is, look, he's negotiating. You know, he's speaking about chemical weapons attacks. And in conjunction with that, he's relying on the Syrian forces. So they know how to do this already. But he's saying that we're going to commit, or Ukraine's going to commit a chemical weapons attack on Russian forces. Right? He just sets it up, and it used to work. It used to work because traditional diplomacy during conflicts like this is like the State Department or CIA or military were not going to come out and say this publicly, tell people publicly this is what's going on. Actually, we've kind of figured out now the way you do this is you say this is what's going on, and then you watch what he does, and you know, there it goes. So I'm quite worried about that. He's also yeah, he's, you know, so he also drives the narrative. We're waiting, you know, victories for the Russians. We're protecting all these Russians. In fact, we have to be there because they're being massacred in the streets. Kind of the opposite of what you actually see. But again, he controls the media, so the Russians largely don't know about this. All right, then I just want to, do these two more. Reinforcements. So as I said, the Syrians and the Chechen fighters as well. It's something they're called the units called the Berkut. He's done this before. So the Chechens are prisoners that have been released from jail, and they're brutal. And he's essentially organized them as the SS. And they are just, oh, I'm sorry, did I say that? I said that incorrect. The Berkut is Russian forces, special forces, okay? And they're like the SS. The Chechens have been freed from prison and even paid, and they've been given free reign to do whatever they want. So that's where you're seeing these really bad beatings in the street. There's been calls for ceasefires. Ceasefires are always an interesting thing, right? So most people don't realize this. So we talk about humanitarian corridors, which they're humanitarian corridors, but they share it with weapons. That's the rearmament. You can actually see, even just retracing what's happened here, that the Russians, so there was the first call for ceasefire, that was after like the first week or something. And you saw those tanks busted down on the highway. You saw the Ukrainians saying, look, we need more of these Stingers and Javelins. So Stingers take off aircraft, Javelins take off tanks. They were calling for more of these. So the parties agreed to a ceasefire, not so much for humanitarian aid, but so that they could resupply themselves. The Russians needed parts and fuel, and the Ukrainians needed more weapons. So don't be taking it by ceasefires. You gotta recognize what's actually going on. I mean, they're all good. I'm all for them. I'm just recognizing that in the midst of war, that actually okay, and then external assistance. That's actually a sign of weakness on Russia's part, going to China and trying to see what he needs. Again, he needs spare parts and he needs ammunition. So we'll see how the Chinese react. So far, they've been talking about both sides of the mouth, so I'm not really sure. Yeah. And so all in all, right now we are in the fog of war. Just chaos. It's hard to see clearly. There has been talks. There's talks today. I guess it would have been yesterday. between Ukrainians and Russians, which seem to move forward. However, the Ukrainians have given up on that. They're giving up their bid for NATO. They're going to put the other big thing was. There was like two big, big. Oh, they did give up Ukrainian as well. Yeah. And they gave up the territories. So yeah. Again, so I have here Texas Hold'em chicken. That's where we're at. So I guess we could either go through this exercise and you guys can try and figure out what. But I know that the one that we're under, so we can either go from that or just take a look to questions. You can ask me about positions I'm interested in. That might be needs of that. Well, what are the so to say what will happen now would be very difficult. Sorry. No, I read something.
Oh, you're just at time, so.
Oh, okay. Yeah, no, I was just mentioning the time. So what will happen? I mean, of course, there's a menu of possibilities. House politics, which would mean he's either assassinated or removed from power by people in power. Popular uprising, better possible outcome, although Russia's pretty good at squashing those kind of things. The Ukrainians could defeat the Russians. Not looking as impossible as that was looking 2 weeks ago. So they could, and they reach a stalemate, and then again, go to the negotiation table, right? The international community could step in and try to force a remedy. And you know, I think I wrote it in the notes there too. I'd be remiss if I didn't say it. Nuclear war. It's possible. Limited nuclear war, where you would hope that you know sanity would return after a couple of strikes. It's a very hopeful thing. That's good. Part of the problem with the sanctions is, I mean, the sanctions are fine. I've never been somebody who believed that sanctions resolve conflicts, these are very stiff sanctions. The problem here is they could backfire in the sense that it pushes Russia and China closer together to create an alternative system to ours. And I'll say that with kind of, I'll point out that it could be a good thing too, though, in the sense that if we return to a bipolar world, it worked for 50 years. But it's a possibility that we're just pushing Russia into that.
If Ukraine beat the Russian army, wouldn't that just further humiliate Russia and just kind of the conflict? You know,
yeah, there's a potential that that's where you escalate to nuclear, by the way, because it's kind of the last word, so to speak. There's the other possibility where it's just recognized that, and you know, either you kind of settle for what you were saying, Russell, about the territories. Is you just take the territories, that you just take your losses and get out. And it is humiliation, especially for Putin, but such a huge ego. This would be a personal shock. And I would imagine that he would be coming back at some point.
I
Like when you say that Russia is, the reason they don't want territories to join NATO is because there might be a preventative reason, war with NATO to try to take these territories out of their state. That might be why they've been so aggressive to any nation that might.
I think at least in part, you have to go back in history and understand that Russia has a very long history of invasion. And then you have to look at the geography of this territory, of Ukraine, Poland, basically all the way to the Netherlands. I mean, Hitler was there. It's flat. So you can move armies across it very quickly. Another factor that why did they do it now? And some friends said, "Oh, they're going to wait till spring," or like, no, they're going to do it right. And the reason why I argue that point is it's cold, and they were arguing no because it is cold, and I'm like, no, the ground's frozen. You don't want to fight the mud. So you do it now. So it's this gateway for invasion for Russia. It's just the gateway. It's happened over and over again. So they have they have a battle period. So we just want to push that back.
At first, I thought that this was like a really smart time to do it because I thought, Americans and Europeans don't have the appetite to, deal with high gas prices. But the more I'm seeing this, the more that the West kind of coalesced as fast as it did. I don't understand why you need to wait until 2024 because prior to this invasion, it was nearly guaranteed that Donald Trump's going to be back in the White House. And if you do this when DT's there, he's probably not going to do much of anything. I mean, you might.
I know there's a lot of analysis about that. First of all, I'm not sure if Donald Trump's was going to get reelected on January 1st of this year.
I would bet you as much money he would have won by guaranteed.
Well, that's not as
I don't love it.
I'm not as enthusiastic as you. But even if that were true, there's some analysis about whether Trump would actually allow this to happen. He wants to break up with NATO, but he's been forced on the fast and zero. So, yeah.
When we talk more about theater and like what China, because it seems like China's main goal, like they don't want to risk their economic stability.
China's walking between the raindrops, trying not to get wet too.
Yeah.
So
I feel like they're final straw for them to get involved. And considering that a lot of.
So I think that China had to take as the same as Russia did or Putin did, that this was going to happen quickly, it was going to be done. You walk into Kyiv, you take over the government buildings, you set up a government, done. Coup accomplished. And so they were probably betting on that because they also, as you know, have their own designs in the Pacific. So, yeah, now that it's like this, I think China, I think President Xi is got to very carefully consider his calculation. So we'll see over the next couple of days. We should start to become clearer again about the war. So we should start. Take one more question as we get kicked out.
Do you think that what's going on with the Uyghurs in China, they self-declare East Turkmenistan. Do you think because Russia has acted in Ukraine in the sense that there's a support to maybe react to
To Uyghurs struggle?
Yeah.
I mean, there should be, but they were both telling the same narratives. One about Ukrainians, one about Uyghurs. Well, they're different. Is that the Uyghurs are being re-educated, right? Again, that is really the balls of our court. Decide what we want to do. Are we going to take a stand? If this proceeds down a bad pathway, we will probably be more fortunate. Because we're going to be more fortunate everywhere. Okay, guys, thank you very much. I really appreciate it. And I hope to see you at our next event.
Yeah. Please do.